Hi, it's Jane, and I know I'm a little crooked, but I'm not going to fight with the camera. Today, I'm going to show you how I make my grocery bag holders. It's a real simple pattern. You don't need a whole lot of stuff. You don't need a lot of interfacing. In fact, I don't use any interfacing on these. This is one of the shorter ones that I do. I do what I call chubbies, where I use a lot of the other fabric that's not big enough for bags or anything else that I want to use it for. I had this patriotic chicken, so decided to make two of those into what I call stubby grocery bag holders. I have a couple of those. And they're, I use up a lot of the different fabrics that I have. Okay, like I said, birdhouses, some daisies. Now these are the longer ones that I make, and these are generally what the normal cutting instructions are for. And basically they wind up being about 17 inches long finished. Normally these are cut 18 across and 21 down. So, that works, but these wind up being about 14 and a half inches long. So you get a lot of different sizes, and I wouldn't worry too much about, the size. The only difference is in how much these are going to hold. These are the ones that I use the measurements of the fat quarter, which was 21 inches. These wind up being about 19 inches long. The only difference is they're going to hold more of the grocery bags that you get from your grocery stores. That's the only difference. A lot of people don't care about the size. They just want something to hold some of those grocery bags while they are sitting around, so that they're not sitting all over the place. And this is a great way to contain them. Then you can place those different bags around your house the way that you would like to. You could put some in your laundry room, in your pantry, by the door as you're going out, in case you go out the front door, back door, whatever. I do have one that's in my garage that actually hangs off of one of the shelves, off an S-hook, so that if I need a bag for some reason, I have them pretty quick and easy to grab and go on the go. So we're going to get into the cutting of it, and then I will show you the sewing. I do have a different setup ordered, and hopefully that'll be here soon. There was a delay in it, where you'll get a better eye view of the sewing of the actual item. It's just right now I have to work with what I have, and that is a tripod. In the past, I have used an overarm view, clamps to the table, but that kind of had some issues. One of those always being that you couldn't get them tightened up enough for the arm to stay, and the arm would start moving. So, and that's a hard thing when you're looking for quality equipment as a YouTuber. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. So we'll cut those bags and kind of move on from there. Hope you'll join me. We're going to cut the fabric for our for a garbage, well, I call them garbage, for the grocery store bags. If you've never made one of these, they're real simple. I mean, it's not that hard to do, but you do need For most of them, they call for a fabric that's 18-inch wide by 21 at least, or 20 inches. But I'll be honest, I don't always have that available. So this one is going to be a shorter one. I call these my little stubby grocery bag holders. And a lot of people like these for putting their leftover plastic grocery store bags into, so that if they're going out to walk the dog, they can take a bag with them, you know, to pick up the poop, scoop the poop. So it doesn't matter the size as long as it's approximately 18 wide by however length you are looking for. So we're first going to straighten this up. When we are looking nice straight cut, one of the things we want to do is to take this selvage end to selvage end, place them together, and I'm going to do a gross exaggeration here. Then we want to look to see that it falls straight down. This does not. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a nice big, what I call a little pooch that would cause a wrinkle. See that? So what you're going to do is keep moving this over one side or the other until you get a fairly straight line. And that looks like about, it's going to do that. And then I do fold it in half, bring the selvage up to the fold. Okay. So let's get into the cut. So now that we've got it cut, a nice folded semi-straight, we're going to look and see how much we need to cut off. And I'm guesstimating approximately about a ½ inch. You want to line your fold up on one of the lines of your cutting mat. Take your ruler, and I think we might be able to get here, but I'm going to double check to make sure. Yep, and that's going to be about right. And then I'm going to make a cut to straighten up my fabric. So I've got a straight edge on one end. And now, because I don't have 20 inches or so, I'm going to line it up and see how much fabric I can get out of this. And I'm thinking maybe 16 1/4 for the length on this. Yep, that's about right. So I'm going to cut this. Now remember, this is going to be what I nickname my stubby grocery bags, because they're short. Now once you have that nice line cut, you're fairly going to have some straight edges. You'll place that along a line on your cutting mat. And then you will cut off the selvage. And I can cut that off at about that. This is a grocery bag holder, so sometimes, depending on if the selvage ends are nice and straight, sometimes I'll just sew them in. Adds a little bit of stability. Now you want this bag to be approximately 18 inches across. You'll notice that this is pretty much a directional fabric, so it's upside down to you, but to me, my direction is going up this way. So I want my bag to be approximately 18 inches across. So I'll come down, and because I've started on the 1-inch mark, I would cut my bag on the 19-inch mark of this cutting mat. Line that up, double check, and then cut my fabric. Now, I have this piece left over. That could be used for bookmarks. It could be used for all kinds of things. It could be used in a scrap quilt. But this now makes 2 grocery bag holders. And what you're going to do is you are going to take your pieces to the ironing board. You're going to fold under 1/4 of an inch this way, and then another 1/2 inch this way. That'll form the casing. You're going to use a 1/4 inch braided elastic for this, and you're going to cut that elastic at 8 inches. That just seems to work the best, 8 inches, but you're going to do that fold to make casing on the top and the bottom of this. And then we will get to sewing a little bit later. But that's how you actually start this. It's not that difficult. It's pretty easy to do. So yeah, we'll move on to the sewing of the grocery bag holder. You do want a piece of fabric that's about at least 1 inch wide, so that you can have a strap for it to hang from. You could use scraps. You could use a piece of extra double fold bias tape that you've sewn along one edge. You could use all kinds of things. You could use a different color. I am going to cut 1 inch off of this. And we really only need 1, because this is long enough that we could actually make 2 ties. 2 ribbons for it to hang off of. But then when you get this piece over to the iron, you're going to fold it in half into the center. And then you would also take your edges, fold them in to the center on each side. Then again, fold it in half so you've got a nice little strap to use. And you're ready to go. All right, I'm not going to show you the cutting of this. I mean, I think you can figure it out. The reason we use 1 inch is because it's a nice thin strap, loop that you're going to make. And you can make it a little wider if you don't like cutting and folding and sewing and ironing that bit. But I am not. I'm going to just make it my inch. Be done with it. And when I tell you that it needs to be folded in to itself, it's pretty easy system. You're basically, when you take it to the iron, you're going to fold it in half this way. Press it. Then you're going to fold each end into the center. And oftentimes I do it at the same time. I'll finger press. And then you would fold it in half this way. Press it, and then you're going to sew along one edge so that you make your strap. Now, I am going to do this all at once for the whole thing, and then I will cut it in half for the 2 loops that you need for your bag to be able to hang on a wall, a hook, or whatever you are placing it. These are a couple of fat quarters that I got at Walmart that I'm going to make into garbage bags, grocery bag holders, but I think you can see where the edges are not quite straight. So yes, I do take off the selvage end because it's not always straight. And sometimes when you get these back quarters, they have what I call samurai cuts, which means it's really uneven all the way through. So I am going to trim this up so it's fairly even. You don't always have to do that if you can factor in your hem piece where it's at. That's probably going to work fine for you. I do not like the way that it lays, so I generally just straighten up my fabric on the end, take off the selvage. Then I will lay my fabric down in this manner so that I can get a fairly straight cut. Because these edges are not quite straight. And it just bothers me a little bit. So I will take and make that nice and straight. Just makes the sewing a little bit easier when you are at the sewing table. The only other thing I do is then I do turn it on its side here and straighten up this end here as well. Because, as you can see, it's a little off. Just a tad. And then I've got a nice straight piece that I can use for my when I get to sewing this into the grocery bag holders. I'm telling you, I've always called them garbage bags, mainly because that's what I use a lot of these, what I consider those bags that I get when I go to the grocery store, garbage bags. So, oh well. All right, that's it for this little bit. Just a warning when you get these fat quarters. Fat quarters normally on the label will say they're 18 by 21. You do want to double check to make sure that your edges are nice and straight. As you can see here, there's a nice little, what I call a samurai cut. It's not quite even, so I will even that up so it is even, and then it's ready to sew. All right. Okay, now we're ready to start sewing the bags, and I am doing my little chubby bags first. I am going to sew my ties. I do sew it all at once and then cut it in half. You're going to need 2 pieces of that 8-inch elastic for each bag. I have 2 bags ready to go. So we'll get started. And we'll move those off to the side. I'm going to reposition you so you have a little better advantage of watching what I'm doing as I sew. All right, we're going to start with sewing the tie. And I will tell you, I do start with a little bit of a leader. These are what these little tabs are. It's just a piece of fabric folded over to get it started sewing. I will bring that up as close as I can to where I'm ready to start sewing. So that it just feeds right through without any issue. And I generally sew this like an 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And there is my tie right there. Now I am going to fold it in half and just cut it in half because it'll make 2 loops for the 2 bags that I'm making. Now I'm going to set that aside. For the actual bag, what we're going to do is, normally you would think we would start sewing the casing. That is not the case. We are actually going to unfold this on both ends. And yeah, I'm going to use my leader again. And we're just going to sew down the sides to start. You've got your casing unfolded, so you're going to start sewing down that side. I do use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You could use a 1/2 inch, whatever your heart desires. Find the 1/4 inch works just fine. And ideally, you want a sewing machine that has a free arm. Free arm just means you can take those pieces and wrap it around the free arm so you can sew. You don't have to have that. There are ways to get your casing done without it. I am doing both bags at once, so I'm going to go ahead and chain piece. That's what it is when you do one piece after the other. If you are a quilter, you're well versed in chain piecing. Most quilters follow chain piecing right along the way. Now, I will tell you, when you're sewing along the edges, a lot of people will watch the fabric. I actually watch my foot to see where the edge of the fabric is, instead of watching the actual, where my sewing line is. Alright, I've got those 2 pieced and cut them apart. Set one aside and we'll work on one. Now for this, the best thing to do is to take this over and press it. But you can actually finger press it. I do have it's called a hair marker. Generally I'll press it. This is a hair marker. And it can be used to press things. So it'll press that, and then I generally take this down and double check that press. Now here is where we are going to fold this down on the line that we'd already ironed when we did our pressing. And we are going to place this around our arm. And we're just going to sew our casing closed, except we're going to leave an opening here on this side so we can get our elastic in there. Now, learn how to use your sewing feet. Many sewing feet have lines on them that can give you an idea of where your seam is. I am doing a 1/4 inch from the edge, and my machine has some markings over here on the side, and so that kind of helps me with that. You're going to leave an opening here before your seam there so that you can get your elastic in. So back tack, then cut your thread. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew the other end too while I'm here. I just kind of do those both at the same time. Just works out a little bit better for me. And again, you're going to leave that opening so that you can put your elastic in. I do meet up the seam to the seam there. Like I said, you should back tack before, but mine has a knot that it automatically puts in the machine, so I don't worry about back tacking many times. Although many times I will do it just because it's good practice. I do go ahead on both front and back, trim those threads. And there's a reason I do trim the threads. Many times you'll have a nice tangled mess if you don't. And I tend to think it makes it at the very end look a little bit neater. Okay, now there are several ways that you can use different tools that you have to thread your elastic through. So I'm going to get one of those pieces of elastic. I choose to use a bodkin, and a bodkin allows me to grab this further down and then slide this down so it's a nice tight fit, and it'll hold that elastic through there, and then you'll feed this through your open end. And I feed it through a little ways. One of the other things I do is I take a needle, just a pin, and I will lay my elastic there at the very opening and pin that in place to hold it, so you don't lose your elastic when you're going through. Now I am going to feed this through, and I'm doing it around my machine, so it may feel a little odd to me, look a little odd to you, but I no longer have an arm that fits over, that clamps to my sewing machine that sits over the top. So I have to use the tripod. It's hard to get the tripod in a position where you can film overhead. You can do it, but tends to be kind of ugly. So now that I've got that bodkin through, what I'm going to do is I am going to release it and hold on to that elastic. I use my thumb and hold that down on that pin. And basically what I'm wanting to do is meet those up so I can sew the elastic together. There's many ways you can sew it together, and I usually just take and place it here. You can choose whatever width you want your elastic to be laying over each other. And then you're just going to sew it forwards and backwards. You want to do this a couple of times. You can move it a little bit each way. And then trim your threads. Although your threads will be inside your casing, but I generally trim my threads. Now I go ahead and I pull that elastic through. Now I hope you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and place this over my machine where I would start sewing. I'm going to take one of these loops here. I'm going to fold it in half. And I am going to slide it up into this, up to the top edge. Then I'm going to hold my thread down with that loop. I'm going to go ahead and sew over it. I do go over the loop a couple times. And then I close my elastic up into this. Now I'm going to pull this back a little bit because what I'm going to do here is pull up my loop to where it's towards the top of where my elastic is, where that hem is, and I'm actually just going to sew across it somewhere. Doesn't have to be right at the top, right at the edge. And I sew a couple of times, just to give it a little added strength. And then there is the top portion. Trim your threads. And then you're just going to repeat that on the bottom for your elastic. Put your elastic in your bodkin. You could use a safety pin. I know a lot of people use safety pins. I generally choose to use a bodkin. I think it works a little bit better. For me, anyway. Then again, I'm going to pin my elastic so I don't lose it. Once again, we're going to pin it in place to hold it there while I'm feeding my elastic through. And then once we get that through there, then we'll release it so we can sew those edges together. And generally I do pull it out quite a bit because that helps a little bit. So I'm ready to lay them on top of one another. Place it under my foot. And this part is fiddly. I do know a lot of people that will just tie them. And you could do that, and that did not work. And then you just want to sew, like I said, a couple times back and forth. This just makes sure that your elastic doesn't come apart inside. You can go side to side, you can go back and forth, whatever works. Now this end, we don't need to worry about putting a loop on there. So we can just sew it closed. Trim any threads you have loose or extra hanging off. Then generally what I do is I stick my hand on the inside, grab my loop, and pull it through. And there you have a grocery bag holder. The loop that you can use to hang it onto a hook or wherever you would like to hang it. And the bottom, like I said, these are what I call my little chubbies because they're short. But yeah, there you have a finished item. Now, I do want to remind you that this fabric is directional. So when you put your loops in, you want to remember that you want, if it is directional, that you'll put your loop in the top part. I don't think I explained that earlier, but that is something you need to keep an eye out for. Now I do want to tell you, these are a lot of people attempt to use with this. And I say attempt, this is, if you've got the purple one, it's called the purple thing or purple whatchamacallit, something like that. But these are a knockoff brand, and they come in handy for a lot of things this end to use as stylish, you name it. But you'll notice there's an opening there for you to feed something through. Now, if you had a larger piece of elastic, that might work better, but a 1/4 inch does not work well. What I find is by using this, that the elastic gets lost in the casing and you have to pull it out and start over. So I don't recommend using these when you are threading your elastic through. Like I said, if it was a 1/2 inch elastic, it might work. Or if it was one of the fold-over elastics, that might work. But fold-over elastic isn't really meant to be used in something like this. This is a braided elastic. Like I said, it just doesn't feed well.